June is part of this, which no one else.
Let her know when they're going to get it. I'm pretty sure that most of us want to read it.
After
So it packs flat except for the base?
Yep.
And is it motorized?
Do you think like they've had this professor before, so like they probably.
So did you ship it?
And also,
Where are you DC? Oh, okay. I think up to DC in October. There's Sony has a accommodations festival that I got a deck, and it's free. And I'll send you the date.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out late on a Saturday to our Gaming for All panel, Accessibility in Games. Just want to remind everybody before we get started that we do like it when you guys rate us on the DC app. So if you wouldn't mind after the panel, please go in there and rate us, give us feedback if you want to. It helps us determine what we do year to year, so please go do that. Other thing, I will have a mic, and if you have questions during the panel, Ben will let you know. He's going to be moderating the panel. He'll let you know when questions, when we're doing that, whether it's at the end or during. Just raise your hand and I'll bring this microphone to you, so you don't have to get up. But other than that, I'm just going to turn it right over to Ben.
Great. Thank you, Elena. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gaming for All Accessibility and Games panel. We're very excited to be here to talk about the state of gaming accessibility, what improvements have been made over the past year, and where we can continue to improve inclusion for everyone in the gaming community. My name is Ben Jacobs. I'm the accommodations specialist at Tools for Life. This is a program that's housed under AMAC at Georgia Tech. Tools for Life is Georgia's assistive technology program. We serve all residents of Georgia, regardless of their age or disability. We often focus on what it takes for people to be productive. Really, we focus on we help people with every facet of their life, whether it's at work, at home, at school, at play. We help people to maintain or regain their independence using technology. So as I was saying, we often focus on what it takes for someone to be productive, to get out of bed and go to work or school or whatever the case may be, come home, go back to bed and repeat the next day and over again. And that's great, but that's not enough. No one wants to just get up out of bed and go to work and come home every day. People need recreational and social outlets, and for many people nowadays, that comes in the form of gaming. I created the Gaming Lab at Tools for Life to demonstrate that technology has come far enough that no one should feel excluded from being able to be a part of the gaming community. So that's a little bit about myself. In a moment, I'll ask the other panelists to introduce themselves and for them to briefly explain their backgrounds in the disability and gaming communities and what brings them to this panel. Then I'll read a few questions for the panel to answer. These are prepared questions for them, just to get the conversation started. And then after that, we'll open the questions up to the audience. I just want to say again, thanks for coming. Please be sure to rate the session in the DragonCon app. We want to hear where we can improve, and if you'd like to see the panel return next year to talk about further developments and progress, the best way to do that is to rate us. Thanks again, and without further ado, Danny, would you introduce yourself and tell us how you're involved in the disability and gaming communities?
Sure. I'm Danny Housley. I'm the Assistive Technology Funding and Resource Specialist with Tools for Life. I work alongside Ben. In the disability community, I am involved in a number of advocacy efforts. I'm a member of the National Federation of the Blind. I'm an active member of ADAPT. And from the gaming perspective, I'm more of a user rather than on the fancy technical end of things. I don't develop. I just use what's out there and try to improvise some things. And that's me in a nutshell.
Mark?
We were fighting over who had to share the mic. Hi, my name is Mark Barlet. I'm the founder of the AbleGamers charity. Started AbleGamers 14 years ago because my best friend in the world had multiple sclerosis and video games were being taken away as that disease slowly tried to kill her. So a lot of you probably know my work. Why am I at this panel? Well, for some reason I keep getting invited. So every other year I come.
Great.
Hi, my name is Laura Levy. I am a research scientist at Georgia Tech, so I am a human factors psychologist and I work in games user research. So anytime you've used any sort of interface or played a game where it sucked, that was where someone like me dropped the ball or probably wasn't hired at all. So I have a specialty in accessibility design for games based on cognitive results and also surrounding the ethics of as games become more pervasive in our world and maybe have more influence on what happens to us in the world. If accessibility features are not designed into those things, we're leaving a huge group of people behind, unfortunately.
Hey, so my name's Mike Matlock. I'm an independent gaming journalist who currently writes for DAGERS.com. It's a website that dedicates itself to accessibility in gaming. And I also have my own YouTube channel where I go by Crippled, Critic. And I make game reviews that are about disabled gamers and what they need.
Great. So I just wanted to start off the conversation. One thing that I've been kind of itching to ask you guys about and get opinions on this year has really, I feel like the past year, VR has been like a big deal. Like this is the year that so many different VR platforms have come to market finally. What are your thoughts on the accessibility of the VR platform and the experiences it can provide? Mike, you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I had a chance to try out VR last year at a game jam in town, and it was a prototype, but I didn't have a whole lot of luck playing it. I think the thing about VR is that it's required at least to move your body, or at least your neck, while you're pressing buttons, and I couldn't really do that, couldn't turn the camera, but I think there's a lot of potential VR. Maybe if they could keep the visual aid and just have an option to move the camera with the controller or something. But yeah, that was my experience.
So I've been working with some of the platforms that are doing VR, and there are teams of people who are thinking about accessibility in some of the platforms. I mean, really, unfortunately, I mean, when you look at any new technology, first they have to kind of perfect the technology, and then sadly people with disabilities kind of come later. But I will tell you, I have been to some major corporations. You can Google the names of them if you want to, and they are working on what they're going to do with disabilities around visual impairments as well as mobility impairments in their VR platforms.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just say I've tried a couple of the different platforms, and there's someone with low vision, like you said, it's not there yet. I tried what's the one from the Dream?
Yeah, Daydream.
Daydream.
Yeah.
I went to the Google Fiber store here in Atlanta, and I got to try it out, and it was neat. I think I was doing something with like Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. So
Did you find it?
I could swivel around. I eventually did find a beast, but it took a little more time probably than somebody else. But I mean, it was neat. It was one of those things where if I'd had less vision, I wasn't getting a lot of cues really as to where to turn. It was all strictly visual. But I'm excited to see where the developments are going to lead for the low vision and blind.
I mean, if any of you wear glasses and you've just put on a Vive, the Vive in particular is difficult. That just having glasses is hard enough to put on a hand-mounted display. And there's a whole other side to disability with using AR and VR is having vestibular ocular issues, so balance issues. This comes up a lot with older adults, so there's a lot of great implications for VR and AR to do rehabilitation or just make people feel like they're not so alone. But as we age, this starts to decline, and you put one of those things on your head, or if you have an injury that caused that kind of problem, you probably can't use a head-mounted display. And so I don't know that there is something that you can do to that to make it accessible if that is the problem, unfortunately.
So I'll add though, I do think that the technology is going to ultimately be good for people with disabilities from an experiential aspect of it. I know I don't really like a lot of VR games. At home I have the Daydream, which is this Pixel, and I also have the Oculus, and I don't really enjoy a lot of the games that I play because they're just like irritating. But I do enjoy a lot of like the experiences where they like take you somewhere and like the rails, so to speak. And I think for, you know, people with disabilities, especially people who have a real difficulty traveling the world, I think that there's going to be at least an opportunity, not a game, but to kind of see things or in a way, like what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I was going to mention, I did see a really interesting demo at E3 for a Walking Dead game, I think, where you are in a wheelchair and you're like in a hospital shooting zombies, but you're stuck in a wheelchair. I thought that was a really interesting idea, you know, kind of confined to a chair and experiencing that in an extreme situation. But yeah.
But you don't do that all the time?
I wish, that'd be fun.
Do you guys have any examples of games that have really been outstanding in accessibility? Any games that have stood out for you? I know, Mike, you write reviews for games, so I imagine you've got something.
Yeah, two. I can think of Street Fighter V, although it had an initial problem, you know, like story and online features, but it's fully customizable, and every move you can customize. And you can make your own preset movesets. Also in Justice 2, which not only has fully customizable controls, it has something called audio cues, which I think Danny can probably explain a little better, but it helps blind players be able to see, well, hear where they are on screen and which moves they're doing. Which I can honestly say I didn't know that there were a lot of blind players who, you know, this is something they need, and they were really good. Like, they can beat my ass at any fighting game.
Danny, did you have anything to add about that?
No, I mean, I can just talk about the having audio cues in pretty much anything is great because there's only so much, there's only so many things that you can do to try to make something accessible on your own. I mean, I've done things like I had gel swatches from like the theater, and I would put those over my lens to increase contrast when I would play something. But if I could have something that would give me an idea of where I'm jumping or what move is being done to me, if it's a fighting game, because I do love fighting games, then you know, that's less tape and less things that I have to attach to myself to make the game accessible.
Yeah, NetherRealm Studio, they also do the same. I think from Mortal Kombat X. Yeah, they're doing great things.
For me, I know one thing that really impressed me, and it's not so much maybe accessibility of the game, but just the representation. Had you guys heard of the game Perception?
I did a voice in Perception.
Oh. So, Perception, for those that haven't heard of it, it's a survival horror kind of game where the protagonist is actually a blind woman, and she goes through this haunted house, and it utilizes echolocation. So she has her cane, and she can bang her cane, and it kind of shows you like an I don't know, like a radar view.
Ghostly radar view.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful, except that it's really just black and blue.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's just your screen is black until you hit that cane, and then everything, all the objects that you see show up as like a blue outline, and you make your way through it. So I just thought that was a really neat concept. The game itself, I'm not sure that it's very accessible to users that are actually blind, but it was still really impressive to see that sort of representation in the game itself.
That is how I navigate haunted houses. No, I've seen screenshots. I haven't gotten to play it yet, but I've seen screenshots. And the thing that I thought was interesting was the fact that it's monochrome, the dark and the light blue. For somebody with low vision, that's the pictures I've seen. It looks like a really good contrast for me. So I'm definitely into trying that out.
Well, I've got it at the office, so you have to come by and try that. So
Look at that.
Or if you
How
find-
convenient.
If you hear my voice, tell me what my story was.
I'll keep a look. I'll keep an ear out for you.
Yeah, confirm that I was actually included.
Sure.
So I think we probably will get to it at some point, but one of the challenges of us not being able to list a lot of games that have really great accessibility features is not only because of the whole argument of because it affects the company's bottom line and all of that. But it's also because there's really not that many tools out there for game designers that are learning, that are in school now, that are making their own independent games. For someone to overlay these layers to understand really what kinds of cues are in my game now that would not make sense to somebody, or what kinds of cues are getting lost if someone has a certain kind of color blindness. And if you're interested in this, we have a GitHub with a Unity visual Acuity plugin that you can overlay on any of your games in Unity, and you can get some of this understanding to make your game more accessible in that instance. So if you want that link, you can come and talk to me afterwards.
So I think there's actually a lot of accessibility in games right now. Naughty Dog just for the first time this year had the word accessibility in the options title. And while I'm not allowed to say a lot of things sometimes, I will tell you that a lot of major game companies have started pushing accessibility inside their studios as requirements for their games going forward, based on the includification guidelines that AbleGamers wrote, and a set of guidelines that came out of England. They kind of pulled what was possible, and they're making all of their internal studios meet these minimum level requirements. And it was like a 34-page document, so it wasn't just like 3 things. And then they're also pushing those policies down to games that make for these different platforms, and I'm actually talking more than one platform, as a norm. So I actually think accessibility, I mean, AbleGamers has actually this year had a crisis of conscience. Like, what are we as an organization? Because when we started AbleGamers, we were really fighting to make sure that game companies knew that people with disabilities played games. This was what we were doing. I mean, we were trying to teach them, like, hey, I have a disability and I can't play your game, fix it. And literally in the last 6 months, I've been to PlayStation Studios, I've been to Microsoft, I've been to Activision, and they've said, like, hey, here's what we're working on now. And I'm just kind of like, oh crap, what do I do now? Because I've spent the last 15 years trying to get you to be like, hey, I'm real, pay attention to me. And now they're like, yeah, we got you, now what? And I'm like, oh, I guess I need to go back to what I originally wanted, which was to create cool custom controllers and give them to people with disabilities who can't afford them. Awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to brag real quick about Josh Stroud, because I know you just mentioned it basically. The creator of the website I write for, Josh, he actually reached out to Naughty Dog because he had trouble finishing the second Uncharted game, and the developer listened and asked, is there any way we can put more accessibility options in the game? And it caused something big. There's a video on YouTube about their accessibility initiative, and what I thought was even crazier and better was that they got disabled playtesters for their game. I'd never heard of that ever, and that's ideally, I think, what you want in order to fully understand what you need to do.
Yeah, well, to that point, AbleGamers about 2 months ago launched our player panel, basically working with Sony. They were looking for more people with disabilities to help them do playtesting. So we partnered with the University of York, which is in the United Kingdom, and we put out a tweet looking for people with disabilities to help join our player panel, and our expectation was 35 people. We're now at 333, 34, I haven't checked my email, people who are wanting to be a part of usability studies and things like that for colleges and universities, as well as playtesting. I mean, from all over, Sight and mobility issues, just all cognitive. Everyone's just like, no, I need to be involved so that I can make my world better.
And I think that's the real challenge. Like, we could spend the rest of the panel defining what accessibility means, because there's so many different ranges of abilities and disabilities across these different things. It seems like really perceptual is the low-hanging fruit for porting those into games as features, but there's all these other ones that are just they're hard. And then what we are tackling is age-related decline for people that have disabilities, because maybe in the 70s, if you acquired that disability, your lifespan was very short just because that was where medicine was. But now, someone in a chair can expect to live just as long as an able person, but now they also have age-related decline layered back on top of that. So how does someone with a disability age, and how do you make an accessible game for that person? It's so complicated, but there's a lot of good people working on it, so it's not dire.
So you had mentioned, like, with aging, Laura, I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about how games can maybe act as like a training tool or rehabilitation for people that are aging.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a hot topic about whether you can play a game and it exercises your brain. I rail against Lumosity all the time, it's total snake oil, but there is actual academic research that shows that the right kind of cognitive training can improve cognitive functioning, especially for older adults. It has to be the right kind of training, and you can absolutely do that in games. So people who are aging have a lot to gain, as you can imagine, from a game that they can play and have this cognitive enhancement or increase. And then people with disabilities that are aging, how do you take that game that you designed, as we say, for grandma to play, a game that she wants to play and that she can't play, that will help her brain? How do you make that an accessible game, because someone who is has limited dexterity or limited vision, they need to be able to play that game in the right way still to confer that benefit. So if it's on a touch screen, we've been doing a lot of studies about limited dexterity. How does someone make gestures on something like an iPhone, but in the way that you're supposed to play the game in order to get that benefit? So we have a long-term project looking into that. Because there's also the social side, of course, which is just connecting people and communities and wanting to persist through the rest of your life to have that. But having the games move with you as you start to have declines in certain functions, and the game just naturally adapts to that.
Mark, you'd mentioned that you'd, in the past 6 months, been to Microsoft and PlayStation, and it sounds like pretty much all the big companies. Is there any one that you would say is really leading the charge when it comes to accessibility and making sure that their platform is usable by everyone?
I run a charity for people with disabilities. The answer is no. I luck everybody equally. They all have money and support my charity.
Yeah.
No, I actually think that, truth be told, here's what's happening, and this is why I love the way I approach the world. One big company decided they were going to do something, and then the next big company said, wait a second, they now have a marketing advantage over us because they're doing something. We should do something. And then the third company said, oh my gosh, they're going to start doing this, and then we're going to be left behind, and we don't want to be left behind, so we should probably start doing something. I have actually been reached, our organization has had like anywhere from 2 to 5 game companies a month for the last 7 months reach out to us and go, oh my God, I heard that is doing something and now we want to do something too. And I'm like, just read the damn thing I put on the website 5 years ago, please. Just do that. And we're done. So I will say, the reality is, one of our strategies was to get one of the big people to say, I accept the fact that there are people with disabilities that want to play my game. Because, as I said, as the troops were coming through Berlin during World War II, the war wasn't over, but everyone knew how it was going to end. And as soon as one big company said accessibility is an issue that they want to really work with, all of their competitors paid attention. And until one of them did it, none of them were going to do it. No one wanted to do it. But as soon as one said, we're committed, I immediately saw, within a month, boom, 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 boom.
I do think Nintendo maybe needs a little work still.
I didn't go to Nintendo. I don't have anything to do with Nintendo.
Well, I think they have a huge step up from the Wii and Wii U. I got a chance to play the Switch, and at least like multiplayer games.
It was by accident. Nintendo does nothing for accessibility.
Right, that's what it seems like.
But that's a cultural thing. So you understand that you know, and I've talked to Nintendo of America people, and they will tell you it's a cultural thing. That if you look at how people with disabilities are seen in Japan, it's not really that positive, and so it's not something that they've really focused on. And it is actually, I believe, I don't know this for sure because I'm supposed to not know this for sure, that there is a conflict between how Nintendo North America wants to approach content and how Nintendo Japan does.
Yeah.
If anyone can validate that.
I think we know it deep down.
Yeah, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but people with disabilities are actually seen as inferior in Japan. And so they just ignore them.
And I can say from the social aspect of that, a lot of Japan is undergoing kind of a cultural shift in how people with disabilities are perceived. They have a burgeoning independent living movement right now, and I'm thrilled to see that because they reach out. I used to work at a Center for Independent Living here in Atlanta, and I would go to the national conferences, and it was refreshing to see there was always a strong Japanese contingent because they are working on having more inclusion. From a design standpoint, a lot of the architecture in Japan is pretty accessible. It's probably more accessible than most places in America, but there is that attitudinal cultural barrier that they are working on getting rid of, and I'm hoping that will translate over into some of these other issues we're seeing with gaming.
Well, I'm hopeful that, again, because of the competitive nature, I'm hopeful that, you know, Nintendo is starting to pay attention to it. I'm sorry if I'm really cryptic because I'm like under a pile of NDAs like this. I mean, like, but I think they're starting to pay attention to it, but only because their competitors are, not because they want to.
Because both PS4 and Xbox One have fully customizable controls on their console, so they're the only ones. So yeah, I think.
Well, and then you also have PC gaming, which always has it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me with Nintendo. I was wondering about that with the Switch. It didn't seem like there's a whole lot of accessibility built into it. But with, like, when they brought out the Wii, with the first motion controls, you saw, even in all the marketing, you saw older people finally playing games and, you know, people with disabilities included in that. It just made it more easily, I guess, again, just for people to pick up and play. But yeah, with the Switch, it seems like they might have taken some steps back or something.
Well, they did with the Wii U.
Yeah.
Well, it's strange because I'm pretty sure that in Japan they think of gaming as a casual thing. So for people who really don't play that often, so it's supposed to be easier for them. So it's kind of strange, you know, like if accessibility doesn't have to be just for disabled people, make it easy for everyone.
Not to keep it on like a negative note, but I was wondering, are there any bad trends that you've seen in games that you wish would stop?
So there's one bad trend I see, which is if you're going to make a really good accessible game, the next one in that title shouldn't be terrible in accessibility. Forza, prime example of sometimes it's the most accessible game of the year. My organization has given it, and then the next year, Terabad. Like, how does this happen? So stop doing that. Only steps forward, never steps back.
I can think of something from a human-computer interaction side is, as game engines get faster and people or studios are more interested in doing hyper-realism and having faster-paced sequences, onboarding is actually getting a lot worse. So when you start the game and you start playing, they just send things too fast at you. And so thinking from cognitive disabilities, I mean, that's a huge thing. Just be able to slow it down because you're trying to learn what's going on. Someone's about to kill you. They've frozen it. There's text, like usually way too much text, and there's all sorts of UI issues there. you're supposed to do something. The button mappings are weird. It just seems to get worse with each game.
Don't hold
'cause
back.
there's
Tell
so
us what
much
you really think.
complexity. Like, just let somebody slow that down or remove some parts of that information.
I have one big worry, and that's mobile gaming. Now, there's some good things. Like when Mario Run came out, I'm not even sure it was on purpose, but they made it so people with one hand could play vertically. But who here has played Pokemon Go? Yeah, it is fun for a while. But I couldn't play it without an emulator on the PC because, as you know, you can't really play it well without leaving your house. And that's a problem, especially with the way Niantic handled everything to do with third-party programs. They basically shut them all down. So I don't really want more of that.
Did you have anything? Okay. Okay, at this time, we're about halfway through the panel, but I'd like to go ahead and open up questions to the audience. If you want to raise your hand, Lane will bring a microphone around to you and you can ask whatever you like.
Hi. You guys spoke to onboarding and to Pokemon Go, but do you have any outstanding examples where companies have dropped the ball as far as accessibility in games? Where they could have done better easily?
I don't. I think every game could be better. I'm only playing 2 games right now, sad to say, but they're great games. I think that, I talked to enough of them, they ship what they can ship and they do what they can do. Do I think there's a game out there that's just horribly inaccessible? Not really. Because accessibility to me is your accessibility needs are different than your accessibility needs versus mine. Everything is accessible to somebody. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but there isn't the example of the crappiest game in the world. I know what the crappiest game in the world is.
Is that big
Pokemon
rig
Go.
racing or whatever?
It's not augmented reality and it's not a game.
It's not, yeah.
But that's a whole other panel.
I could name a few, but I think it just has to do with what, like you said, what types of accessibility options are in it. If there's none, that's not great. If there's no customizable controls, there's no subtitles. I think a game without subtitles nowadays, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, but you don't really see that anymore because they use the subtitling for localization. Deaf gamers have actually done really well because they put all of the subtitles in and then they send it to a company to get it translated into German, and they re-release it in German and call it subtitles.
I think if a big name company like Rockstar can put auto aim in their game, I think every game should do that. And then, when it doesn't, it's a little frustrating, but yeah.
Okay, I have sort of a couple of questions. If you don't mind, I'll make them as fast as possible. I came in late, so I apologize if you already answered this, but how do you recommend getting involved in, if not accessible game, in developing accessible gaming, then at least accessibility software, or overlay mods that maybe if the game doesn't live up to it, maybe we could, at least on the PC Master Race, can work on modding it, and if it's make text larger, I know perceptual is the low-hanging fruit, but make it work. Do you have any recommendations on that?
Well, I had said before, so we have created our own Unity overlay for, if you have a game in Unity, you can see different kinds of color blindness and also foveal issues and peripheral issues, what your game looks like to someone that has those kinds of vision problems. There are some other plugins like that. It's kind of hard. There's no one central compendium where you can just go and find these things, so it takes a lot of Googling. I can give you the link for that one. A lot of this is happening in universities, so it's often looking for accessibility centers at universities and seeing what the students are doing and what the research initiatives and goals are, and then hoping that they'll share their code with you, which is more common these days. and hoping it's something that you can use too. 'Cause some people write in weird languages that should not.
I was thinking less like getting help with the code and more like being able to work on the team that creates it. Like I just graduated, so I'm kind
Back
of
to
looking.
school forever.
just go back to university forever.
Don't do that.
Okay.
No, I didn't go back to school, and I make a lot more money.
All right, thank you.
We can argue about that.
So I have cerebral palsy, so I typically game with one hand, and I've noticed in the recent years, particularly from Nintendo, an increase in motion gaming and an increase in larger controllers, such as the Switch. How can we as gamers and charities, how can we, I guess, encourage developers to maybe maintain traditional controllers or have alternate schemes?
Don't buy it if they don't make it for you, because that's the first thing you should do. And the second thing you should do is be vocal about your needs. Because, I mean, I tell people this all the time. There's a reason why they say squeaky wheels get the grease. Be squeaky. You'll get satisfaction. So if you're not finding what you want, be vocal about it. You know, and if someone else with a similar problem that you're having joins in, and then all of you guys start becoming a big pain in the ass for Nintendo, they will do what they can to, look, I have gotten more accessibility done by embarrassing a company on Twitter. I got an all expense paid trip to New York and one of the only people to be in Rockstar Studios for one tweet. So, I'm not saying that like flippantly, I'm saying like be vocal about your needs and call them on it.
Thank you.
I have a quick thing to add. We think a lot about the future of gaming and what that's going to be, so what consumer gaming is going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I do think there's an inflection point. There's this want for us all to get up in front of a Kinect and use motion controllers and all of that, but the truth is we are pretty lazy. We just want to sit on the couch and not do a lot of motion. So I think that controllers there's a lot of feature creep. They're getting bigger. People think it's motion, it's not going to happen. I think it's going to start going into more simple, intuitive controllers that don't rely on motion interfaces. So that's probably good news for people that could really help.
I couldn't agree more. No, I couldn't agree more because I mean, there's a reason why you can't really get a Kinect anymore because, you know, who wants to sit in your living room 15 hours a day playing like Halo Kinect? If that was the case, we would just go outside. So I actually 100% agree that I think that no one really wants the motion control, and I think you are going to start seeing just we're going to just get back down to where we need it to be.
We need those brain-computer interfaces now. We don't have to push any buttons, we just think.
But if I don't push the buttons, then there's no exercise at all.
Perfect.
Hi, I teach a gaming course for artists at FSU, and it's basically a crash course for people that have no programming skills at all. So it's really hard for me to fit much more than just the basics in something like that. But if there's like one or two things that would be a starting point for teaching people that are just dipping their toes into this sort of thing, what would you say would be a good starting point for people thinking about this?
Funny you should ask this, because we actually are about to start a study with Georgia Tech students doing essentially this. They can code, but they're not game programmers. They just happen to be taking a computer audio course. So one of the things that we're doing is we're providing them with stock video of a simple game like Pac-Man. It's just a video clip. They get a little bit of training about, in this case, sonification of visual content, which might apply for you teaching artists. And they are going to just kind of overlay their own audio on it. I mean, they're just going to use a video editing program, and then we're going to assess that against a rubric. So we found that it really doesn't take that much extra training, and the main things that you want to do is you want to instill empathy for why this would happen, and there's all sorts of physical artifacts you can do too. There's like blacked out glasses that you can use. There's weird gloves to simulate reduced dexterity and have them play games. Weird gloves, yeah, I think it's Weird Gloves. It's a trademarked name. But you can also show videos, just do walkthroughs, participatory design, design thinking, all these kind of like buzzwords and tech right now. But have them make a little video clip and then go through it with them and say, yeah, you did this right, you did this not so right, and just walk them through like what the accessibility should be of visual content.
I would say make sure you're actually including people with disabilities when they're doing this, because yeah, you can have all the blackout glasses and weird gloves you want, but that's not really gonna give you an accurate sample or accurate feedback. You want, because I can give you 3 people with my eye diagnoses, and we're all going to do things a little differently, and we're all going to perceive things a little differently. So yeah, just having a filter isn't good enough. You want to actually include the people, and that that including somebody in that process with the people that are doing this, it does a little more than just like the empathy part of it. They actually see it in action, and they can kind of learn it as they go.
And ideally, you would want a disabled playtester, but I know indie developers don't always have that ability. So just ask questions. Can I play this game without sound? Can I play with just one hand? Things like that.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. So for my current job, I do a lot of facility accessibility design and construction. And I came to this panel kind of wondering about some parallels between the physical design world and the design world inside a video game. And I think I'm coming at this from a different place than a lot of people, but for particularly the panelists with disabilities, how do you see the world you experience every day represented within a video game? Do you feel like it's represented accurately? What would you want to see done differently? That type of thing.
Well, I would definitely love more representation. And I think you see it sometimes with like someone with a cyborg arm or something, where their eyes have been replaced with like robot eyes or something, but you rarely see anyone in a wheelchair, which I think there's a lot of potential to have players experience what it's like to be in a wheelchair in a fun way. I think like Dead Rising 2, you can like mow down zombies in a wheelchair. Is it Sly Cooper? There's a turtle who's in a wheelchair, and he's awesome. Yeah, I don't see it often, but I'd like to.
I don't remember which board games they were, but board games actually have really good representation for people with disabilities, and I was playing one recently where the character that's in a wheelchair is the character you want because he's super stealthy, so you can like go through all these, it's like a zombie apocalypse, and nobody ever hears them, so we are always fighting over that character, so you can make it a part of the game mechanics and to drive the story and make that a lot of fun.
I don't see representation in games. I know that that's probably not great. I mean, I'm openly gay as well, and I just want to play a good game, and I very rarely notice the avatar that I'm playing, and I guess I don't, even as a person with disabilities. I recognize when I see characters with disabilities in the games, but it's just not something that I've looked for.
It's something I don't really. When I play a game, I mean, I think about. So I spend a lot of time in the accessibility world, paying attention to steps and curb cuts and truncated domes and where stuff is.
Yes,
and I don't see that portrayed in games as much. It was a few years ago I saw the movie Big Hero 6, and I was sitting really close to the screen. Holy shit! There's curb cuts on the sidewalks, and they even had the high contrast truncated domes, and that was a movie, not a game, but it was something where it clicked, and I was like, look, they're actually paying attention to the world that we live in, and they're representing that. In a lot of the games I play, I don't see that. don't see that at all.
was more what my question was. Is I see these things as I walk around because they're part of my work life, and I'm not really much of a video gamer. And I wondered how that was represented in video games. Or it sounds to me like it's mostly not, and it's new.
I don't know if it's mostly not. I've never noticed. I've never not noticed.
I mean, you'll see things like automatic doors when you're going through that like ship to find the alien that's going to kill you. But I mean, you don't see a lot of those other architectural design elements side of it.
Real quick, I just wanted to mention there's a game called Life is Strange, which is a great game, and there's a character who you don't play as, but she kind of does something terrible where she tries to steal money from like a handicap fund. But the game involves time travel, so in the next instance, she becomes someone who's paralyzed, and that's a whole other experience that's really interesting. It kind of went down a dark path, but I think it was worth mentioning because it was different.
Hi. So I work as a user experience designer, and I worked in games for a couple of years, and now I work making enterprise applications, which is more boring but needed. So I was wondering, as far as applications go, like computer applications, what are some concepts from gaming that you would like to see accessibility-wise in the world of apps, just productivity apps? I don't know. That's it.
I will say that's an incredibly interesting question. So during the day, I work for the Department of Homeland Security. So every enterprise app that I work on is 508 compliant. And I wish they would put some more gaming elements in it because they're boring as hell, but they're not there.
Yeah, I think, accessibility in apps, any app, whether it's a game or otherwise, is definitely, it's important. Some things to look at. I know a lot of people use Talkback on their mobile device. This is an accessibility feature that actually reads what's on your phone out loud for you. And there are some apps that just aren't compatible with that. It won't, if you don't properly design your app, then that Talkback feature just doesn't give any feedback at all. So that's definitely something, that along with games, whether it's a game or an enterprise app, like you had said, I think it's important that you make sure that you have that compliance in there with it so that those features work.
Your thinking is cutting edge right now. That's why we don't have an answer. I mean, you're literally on the end. Stay there.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what came first. There's probably an answer, but was it heads-up displays in games or the hamburger overlay in an app? Who borrowed that? Because they're essentially the same thing in terms of displaying information to you on demand. Was that borrowed from? I don't know. I don't even know that's relevant, but I'm going to be thinking about that all night.
That is a good question.
But you could consider that an accessibility feature, and especially how you prompt it as well.
On a positive note, I know that Apple they're doing great things this year. A few months ago, their conference, they had so many panels teaching developers how to make their apps more accessible. So that's great.
You can go ahead.
As someone who is massively colorblind, I was wondering if you guys had seen any trends regarding colorblind assistance modes, colorblind modes in gaming, or even in, as she had said, applications. As personally, I keep looking for them and have seen very few. I was wondering if you guys had seen any or trend where tools are coming available for things like colorblindness.
I don't know what you're playing, but I see colorblind modes in almost every PC game I'm playing right now.
I've seen 3 out of the several dozen games I've played in the last couple of months.
Every Capcom game I've seen, they don't always make great games, but they always have colorblind.
Almost everything from EA has colorblind. I mean, I will say in Battlefield 1 they didn't do colorblind correctly and they fixed it in the first patch, but they had it in there. Are you sure you're looking in the right place?
Are you playing AAA games or are you playing indies?
I'm playing a combination of the two.
Yeah.
Because I bet you the indies have nothing.
Yeah, like the indie games almost always, and they will actually differentiate the different types of colorblindness, as opposed to most of the AAA games that I've seen where they do it. It's just a checkbox and they just change the reticle on it to blue. And
I'll
that
say
says
that
there's some total.
Battlefield 1 has all the different types of colorblindness, and you select the one that you are, and it changes the entire game around that.
Okay. I haven't personally played Battlefield 1.
It's a great game. It's the one I'm playing.
Yeah, I didn't have money when it came out, and I bought a bunch of other stuff. It was a Steam sale.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that most indie games I've played do tend to have more accessible options, and I think it's because they want more people to play.
Market differentiator.
Yeah, so I think we'll try those.
You brought up sound cues for the visually impaired. Can you give some examples? Because I think that it would be more than just like an effort sound effect of like someone jumping. Would it be more like what?
So some of the ones that I've so they'll do a mix of sound and if you're on like a console, the vibration. So I played recently. Did I have some?
A gamer, are you?
I'm not. No, I play dice. But I mean, it's something that gives you an idea of. Well, mobile game that I played was it was a blind game where you're a knight kind of wandering through the woods, and you're supposed to wear headphones. So that way, when your guide that you're with says, "I'm over here," you can actually tell if it's behind you, to the left, front, or wherever. And then when you turn to go that way, then you get the sound of like the grass crunching.
Was it blind sound?
No, it was. I think it was called Blind Night.
Because I have blind sound.
So I have not done some. I've done Blind Archery too, which gives you an audio cue as to when to let the string loose to hit the target. But oftentimes you have to wear headphones and have a little bit more immersion with it. If you're doing something on a console, then it'll pair the sound cues with the vibration. So like the left part will vibrate with the sound, so that you know to shoot to the left, shoot to the right, or whatnot.
Like a fighting game with more combat or injustice, they make like a specific sound to let you know what side of the screen you're on, and what a specific move that you're about to do or you're doing, stuff like that.
And because I'm helping teach this class on computer audio and sonifying games, there's a lot of sound design that goes in of making sure that the sounds that you're using are ecologically relevant, because you could just make a beep, to tell you something's over there, and that has nothing to do with the gameplay. So making sure that all of these tones and sounds make sense within the game. They belong to the same suite of sounds, and there are paradigm frictions, I guess you could say, that are established in the research. You would think that to us, to someone who has good sight, an ascending tone might mean that something is going up or getting lighter. But we did a big study with those that were totally blind. Something heavier makes a larger thud. That has more value, like a bag of coins makes a deeper, bigger thud. That would have a higher significance, a higher semantic metaphor to them, as opposed to a little thing just makes a small sound. That would have a higher pitch to us and denote that value. It's completely flipped. So there are a lot of these things that you have to think about that are unintentional. When you usually release a game, you realize you have a community that says this makes no sense to me, it's very confusing. That comes out and you go, oh, okay, we have to completely change our style guide for the audio for this game.
There's a great YouTuber named Blind Critic that, so I got a chance to meet him last year. That was my guy right there, just making all that noise. And I watched his YouTube just because I met him one time, and then I got fascinated because he does a series where you can ask him questions about, he told a joke, like a friend came over, and after 30 minutes they said, "Can we turn on some lights?" And it never even dawned on him that it was dark in his house. And then he realized he had lights on for a month because his friends turned them on and didn't turn them off. So I would suggest, and I say all that to say, I have found it amazingly educational to just, as you were talking about these pitches, to hear him talk about what life is He did one on what transparent is. What do you think transparent is? And I was just like, wait, you don't know that? And he was like, well, this is what I think it is, but I'm not sure. The difference between transparent, translucent, and opaque.
Yeah, understanding mental models is a huge deal for designing any kind of content within a game.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll do closing statements.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, think of it.
Thank you. I have a question. So we know from looking at other media like movies and TV that the better representation on the production side, so more people of color, for example, writing movie scripts and things like that, the better representation tends to be in the final product that we see. So I was wondering if you all had some knowledge about statistics or hiring practices in the game industry, maybe at large, where there's incentives or there's movements toward hiring more people with disabilities on the production side, not just as testers, but as coders, artists, producers.
Well, they're shaking their heads no, which isn't good. But I can say on the university side, that with so much emphasis on inclusion and diversity of the student body and also for clubs, I was on a representation panel like 2 hours ago and said this, the diversity in the coding teams and also just the game design teams, all different roles that people are pumping out these games in colleges is incredible. I mean, I've never seen such diverse teams in any field. And these kids are going to graduate and they're going to wind up in industry, and that's just going to get more common as time goes on. And hopefully, I think that's why we are seeing diversity and representation in games like Overwatch, which we talked a lot before. And hopefully this trickles into accessibility as well from these kids that are getting trained and graduating out of the universities.
So I'm going to say that you are correct with the universities, that you guys are doing a phenomenal job of recruiting, and I hope that there's a change.
We gotta go somewhere.
Right, right. Well, but that's just it. I know several developers who are at various levels of disability who have gotten out of the industry and moved into enterprise software because the game companies just don't know how to accommodate them or care to accommodate them. Further, I would just want to say, as just an example, Intel a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, gave $122 million to increase the diversity in the tech field for women, people of color, and the LGBT community. Do you notice who was missing? Disabilities. They were completely left out of the we need to add more diversity, and I became a squeaky wheel on that. But I will say that there is a huge move for diversity, and I love it. But unfortunately, people with disabilities are kind of not getting included in that as much as I think they should.
Yeah, I mean, we have to all be advocates for each other. And I think there's a rise in that now, especially in universities and young people, and that really needs to translate out, because this, like we said before, this old, staunchy, traditional, conventional people that are running EA and all of those, they'll move out eventually, but it's just such a slow process.
But first you have to get off their lawn.
Yes.
Well, I have to say, just to add on to that, I work in HR, I hire a lot of people. I can attest to diversity is often left out of that training class that every HR does, where you have to talk about all the different kinds of diversity in the organization. People with disabilities are often left off of that. And I can attest to when you propose that we have panels talking about hiring people with disabilities, that the HR community is thirsting for it, they're starving for it, because they haven't been talking about this enough for the last few years. And I've experienced that just with proposing panels myself, that they're like, oh my God, yes, we want to talk about this, please come and do it 3 times. So, I mean, that shows to me that there is a need for it and people want to hear it, but unfortunately it just hasn't been talked about enough. So I'm beginning the same with any other industry you're talking about across the board. Anybody who hasn't asked a question want to ask a final question? We've got time for one more. No? Okay, then I'll let you do first and last.
All right, well, my other question was terrible, so I'm going to pivot and ask. For smaller developers who maybe don't have the resources to necessarily develop accessibility tools, when they're just trying to get something that's functional out the door, do you have anything to say to a company that's that small?
I know I've been reached out by a few developers on my YouTube channel, and they always tell me that it's a lot easier to get accessibility options in their game if they start early.
Yeah, it's exactly. If you start early, there's no need for tools.
Yeah.
And it's the whole participatory design, like we've all been saying. It's like involve people of that demographic at every stage, and don't build a ton and then show it to them. Build a little bit, like I said in the representation thing. Make paper prototypes. I love paper prototypes. You don't need a wireframe. You don't need a video. You don't need a working anything. Cut things out, glue them on paper. Let people draw stuff. Go back to the drawing board. Make something a little bit more. Show it to them again. It's a whole iterative thing. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's a lot less work than finishing a product and realizing that everybody hates it, or the people that you designed it for hated it, which is the worst.
I'm working on that project right now.
Yeah.
Any final comments you guys want to make before we wrap up? Dean?
What I would say is, when we talk about the accessibility, we focus a lot on the software side of things. Like I said earlier on, I don't really deal with the software side of things. For years, I've just kind of worked on what can I improvise in order to play a game, because I wanted to play like the role-playing games, or I wanted to play some of the fighting games, but mid-90s on, there weren't a lot of options. So it was a matter of like, okay, how can I affix this magnifying glass to my glasses so that I don't have to hold it, or what can I do as far as a color overlay from like a hardware standpoint to make something more accessible. And it's so exciting now to see you don't have to strap things as much to yourself to play a game. That can be done on the software side of things, and that's I'm excited to see that and watch it grow.
So my final thought has nothing to do with games. I challenged myself to make a cosplay that person with disabilities could use, so I made that Zoltar booth that's way back in the back. It's built on electric wheelchair base. I say that because you guys need to vote for me tonight when the thing happens. I did actually win runner-up novice for that, but that's completely built on a wheelchair base, and if you have a mobility disability, it uses just a standard wheelchair joystick to get around. And to your point, I have a best friend who is profoundly disabled, and I used to navigate all the curve cuts and everything for him. Now that I'm doing it myself, I'm terrified. So Atlanta has some challenges.
Just a few.
An amazing positive about this space is the community is incredibly dedicated and have used every resource of the web, Slack, forums to share and talk about their needs and what they want to see. Join a makerspace, a hackerspace, find a 3D printer, start playing with your own things. There's code online that you can download, print stuff, GitHubs, share stuff, join a game jam and make the accessible games that you want to see, and just fail, make something better, and figure out who's in this community, whether they're actually in the city that you live in or you just interact with them online.
Just to go back real quick to just how games can help people with disabilities, rehabilitate them, and why they're so important. I wanted to mention a little story about a writer who works for the website I write for. His name is Jeremy Peoples, and I think people often hear, games help hand-eye coordination, but they don't ever really hear like a personal story of how it really helps. Jeremy was born premature, and because of that, he lost his eyesight in his right eye and most of his hearing in his left ear. And after a few years, his doctor recommended he buy an NES, which is a cool doctor, and for hand-eye coordination. And it did help him, and he, acclimated to society and became a writer. And it's real. Games help.
Well, I know we've gone a couple minutes over, but I wanted to thank everyone for coming, and especially our panelists. Thank you all, and be sure to rate us on the DragonCon app so that we can come back next year and
vote for Zoltar.
Yep, vote for Zoltar, and we'll hopefully see you all next year.
And don't forget, at 8:30 we're doing, or in 30 minutes, we're going to be doing a demo of some various kinds of hardware. I think Ben's going to be firing up some consoles and showing some accessibility features and a few different things. So come back in 30 minutes. We've got a lot of cool things to play with.
Anybody want